Hello, now today we've got quite a short video on a helmet because this is a helmet where I don't have the liner for it. So I've got a liner on order because it was one of those weird cases of getting French M51 helmets on UK eBay. You could get very good condition helmet shells for a reasonable price. Getting the good condition shells with a liner was quite expensive, and I found a French seller that had like the last generation of like the very good quality liners for these for not too much money, so I thought I'd just order them separately and then, you know, fit that and do a video later on with that fit. So this is a French M51 helmet. Now, those of you that are very observant will probably notice this is very much a rip-off of the US M1 helmet. It looks ever so slightly different, and I imagine the ever so slight differences is plausible deniability that the French had ripped off the M1 helmet. So the history behind this is that back in World War II, the French were using Adrian helmets. I think there was a Modele 1945 helmet they introduced very close to the end of the war, I assume in liberated France. They were also, you know, buying and using US M1 helmets. I think they were probably buying and using British helmets as well, you know, just generally because Free France at the end of the war didn't have much infrastructure to be making lots of their own stuff, so they were just being buying or given helmets from whoever. So France had a sort of mix of helmets going into the start of the Cold War, and obviously they wanted to make their own helmets so they didn't have to keep paying royalties, you know, come up with their own design, you know. Makes a lot of sense. So what they did is they probably looked at all the helmets and thought the US M1 is the best of all these helmets. So they basically just copied the M1, as I said, with a few different design choices. The only real design choices between this and the M1, I believe, is that the M1 is slightly steeper sloped. I'd have to get my M1 out and put them next to each other to see how much of a difference it is. But, you know, from just looking at these, there is barely a difference between these and the M1. So it's a similar system as well, where the main straps to attach it sit on the outer bit of the metal shell, and then basically on the inside you'd have had a liner that just sort of holds in via friction, and then over the years they improved. You know, you can see early ones that are very leathery looking, and then later ones that are much more plastic and foam based, which is the type I'm ordering, that, you know, look a lot tougher and better protective of the head. So, but essentially the helmet is just a big bowl like the M1. So you can see the manufacturer's mark in there. It says something like Messei or M-E-S-S-E-I, or maybe that's an R that's gone. But this was produced in 1952. So this stayed in French service for a very long time. This helmet was in French service until about, I think, the 1970s, but even then it was never fully phased out. And in the 1970s, basically, they came up with an improved steel helmet, which is more of their own design. But even then, looking at the Modele 1975 helmet, or the Modele 1975 helmet, I think that ended up looking quite, or it might have been a 1979 helmet, I can't remember, it's quite a late one into the Cold War. But again, it was quite a lot like maybe the East German M56 or the Romanian M73, or, you know, the Soviet SSH-68. It was a much more conical helmet, which looked a bit thicker in steel and was more conical. So I imagine in terms of protection it was very good. And apparently France hasn't even fully phased that out today, even though they're replacing it with lots of, you know, Kevlar helmets now. I believe that was shortened often as the F1 helmet, just like they called a lot of stuff in that time period F1. You know, like F1 camouflage and that, even though it had a proper name, like something like Central European Camouflage Pattern, they ended up just calling it stuff like F1 camo, F1 helmets and all that, I believe. So yeah, there's not loads to say, as I said, unfortunately, on this video about this helmet, because this one does not have the liner, so obviously it is far too big for me. But yes, this is a French M51 helmet, and as you can see, you know, it's way too big for me without the liner, but what you can see is it's very much a US M1, just slightly different. So I think these in their own right would have been pretty good helmets. The steel on these does feel quite good quality, because as I said, a big drawback with a lot of steel pot helmets is if they're made from cheap steel, they're not actually very protective at all, even if the helmet looks good. So these actually do feel like a good steel feeling them. But, you know, without the liner it's not very useful until I get a liner, and again, nowhere near as good as modern Kevlar and thermoplastic helmets. But the point was, for 1951, this was pretty damn good, you know, no better or worse, really, than the US M1 helmets. And yeah, France obviously used them for quite a while. As I said, you can't give the French much design originality for this, because it was essentially a stolen M1 design and just changed a little. But it is what it is, and, you know, if you're a soldier wearing it, it would have given you quite good head protection for the time, at least, so there you go. The French M51 helmet, or Modele 1951, basically an M1 rip-off.